So the one thing that we do control is our perspective. And by shaping our perspective, we have the ability to shape our outlook. So the curriculum is taken from a very large responsa, large gathering of correspondence that the Lubavitcher Rebbe had over many years, starting from when he came to America in 1941, all the way up until 1992. He corresponded with many, many thousands of people. We actually have 30 volumes full of just his letters, which are more than 10,000 letters to people of all walks of life, to great Torah scholars in scholarly discussion, to simple people like us in life matters, giving us advice and guidance in sometimes simple, basic things, sometimes in real challenging life decisions. And the correspondence is very eye-opening, and there's a lot to learn from these sometimes simple life lessons. So today's lesson will focus on just one letter. It's really just one point, but it's a very important point, and it's actually a very relevant point for what we're experiencing now in this current challenging situation. I don't have to tell you all that for many people, this is really quite a challenging couple months, and hopefully it won't last. But there's definitely reason to apply these messages now. So the class is called Displaced. And what we're going to focus on is what happens to a person when they are displaced, when they are, taken out of their comfort zone, taken out of their their space. We'll talk about how important our space and our surrounding really is for us, what it gives us, what it provides for us, and then the unique challenge of being, taken out of that space and what happens then. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint, which will enable you all to follow along. Where is the PowerPoint? Let me open it. I'll open the PowerPoint. So we'll be talking about the piece of advice, and really just a letter that the Rebbe wrote to someone in 1945. In 1945, I'll give you some background of that. He had, the Rebbe lived in Germany until 1963. And sorry, 1933. In 33, when Hitler came to power, they decided to move to France, and they lived in Paris for several years. And I think here's the PowerPoint. And they lived in Paris until 1940. In 1940, it started becoming, much more difficult to stay there as a Jew. Nazis invaded. They were taking over. And the Rebbe and his wife, Chayamushka, who was herself a special person, they started traveling south in France, and they spent about a year really displaced in South France. They were in Vichy and then in Nice until they were finally able to leave Europe. They spent about 12 months on the run, hiding from the Nazis or the Nazi collaborators. They spent a lot of time trying to help other refugees, and they were, displaced. So several years later, the Rebbe wrote a letter to somebody who he spent time with in Vichy. And naturally, you would imagine that when you look back at that time, you would look back at it in such a sad way. It was a really challenging time, and people were dying, and everyone's lives were in danger. They were constantly on the run, constantly unsure of what tomorrow would bring. You can imagine people reminiscing about that time and saying, wow, wasn't it so hard and difficult? Remember those challenging times, those sad times we experienced together? Aren't we grateful that we moved out of there and we're now living in America in a much better position? You would imagine that kind of correspondence. But what in fact was the letter was actually reminiscing in a very positive way about the unique abilities that are provided by being displaced. The Rebbe had a knack for always finding the positive in every situation. And you'll see that over the next couple lessons, the next couple discussions that we'll have, we'll always see how he's finding the positive in each situation. And that's not, of course, that's not being in denial of the challenges, but we choose what we focus on. And he's writing about how the living conditions that were being experienced then actually provided a unique opportunity. So let's see. Here's the text. It's on the third day of Hanukkah in the year 5705 in the Jewish calendar, which corresponds to December of 1944. So it's deep in World War II. And it's just a few years after they themselves, both the Rebbe and the person he's writing to, had spent a full year hiding from the Nazis in Biscayne. So I'll read it. My esteemed and honored friend, Mr. Dov Fedber. I don't know much at all about the recipient of the letter, but let's see what the letter says. Greetings and blessings. Your letter awakened memories of the time that we were together in Biscayne, each of us under living conditions to which they were unaccustomed. When a person is uprooted from their habitual environment, until such time that they become accustomed to the new conditions and requirements, there come to light certain traits of their inner character as they are in their purity, undistorted by the expectations of society. Often these traits reveal hidden virtues of the person, virtues that have been hidden even from themselves under the layers of manners and social conventions. In such cases, fortunate is the person who does not allow these traits to disappear when they subsequently settle down and find tranquility. It's a really interesting perspective and interesting way of reminiscing on living in Nazi Europe. And I think that this is very relevant to us now, obviously on a much smaller scale. I don't think that any of us can really relate to those challenges, but in certain ways, a lot of the things that we've been accustomed to and regular habits that we've considered to be so normal for so long are being challenged. And we're in some sense, we're all displaced from our habits, from what we're used to. So to understand the Rebbe's perspective on dealing with displaced, let's first talk about why is being displaced such a challenge? What's the big deal? Why is it so hard for a person when they're uprooted from their habitual environment, as the letter says, and when they're living in conditions that they're unaccustomed to? So I'm going to bring over here on the screen a quote from Hillel. Hillel was a Talmudic scholar, lived in the 1st century before the Common Era. So that's over 2,000 years ago. He's pretty often quoted in the Talmud and the Mishnah. He said what's become a famous line, said Hillel, do not separate from the community. Hillel recognized a self-evident truth, a truth recognized, I would say, by every culture and society, that human beings need social life. Aristotle is famous for saying that the human being is by nature a political animal. And we thrive on being together. We're used to and we need to function as humans. We need to be together. And we interact together. We create a community which is not just technical benefit, for commerce and trading and the economy, but it's something vital for a human being just as a person. The famous line from John Donne, the English poet, that no man is an island of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main, and any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. That's from John Donne. No person is an island on itself. We live on a beautiful island, but we live together on an island. None of us are our own independent island. We all are part of a broader community, and we need that to be ourselves. It's not a bad thing. It's a very good thing. Social life and social interactions are very important for a human being. And as a matter of fact, they have a special role for us Jews. The Jewish community historically has been something which was very central for us. We've lived together. We've fought for each other. We've died for each other. We look at our fellow Jew as not just another person in our society, but as the famous analogy is, like another part of the same body. We're all part of one body, and we each have different functions and different roles, but we together comprise one people. Many of you are familiar with Rabbi Laura Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. He's a wonderful author. I really like his books. This book I'm putting on the screen now, this quote, it doesn't say who it's from, but it's from Jonathan Sachs from his book, Radical Then, Radical Now. It's about the Jewish people, how we were radical and we still are radical. And he really brings out this point. He drives it home with these eloquent words. So I'm gonna read over here from the screen. A letter on its own has no meaning. Yet when letters are joined to others, they make a word. Words combine with others to make a sentence. Sentence connect to make a paragraph. And paragraphs join to make a story. That is how the Baal Shem Tov understood life. Every Jew is a letter. Each Jewish family is a word. Every community, a sentence. And the Jewish people at any one time are a paragraph. And together, the Jewish people, we make a story. We combine for a strange, a remarkable story that might be unparalleled in mankind, of this story of a bunch of individuals who on their own are just a letter. If we look back at this analogy, each of us is just one letter. And we combine to make a word and then a sentence and a paragraph and then a beautiful story. And if any of us would try to separate ourselves from that story or that sentence or that word, then we're just a letter. We lose so much of our meaning. Because a story, at the end of the day, a story is just a bunch of letters. And the meaning that's there in the story is a sum of all of these individual letters. But it's much more than just that sum. The meaning of the story surpasses the sum of its individual parts, right? That's what a real community does. The point of a community is that the sum is greater than each of the parts. When we come together as a community, let's talk about Biscayne, for example. Our Jewish community in Biscayne provides each of us with something that we can't get on our own. And it creates something, a whole, a unit, which is far more valuable than the sum of its parts. So that helps us understand how vital social community life is. And our social connections are our families, our workplaces, our communities, even our casual interactions with strangers in public space. They play a major role in nurturing our well-being, in supporting our productivity. And therefore, it's not a wonder at all that when all that's taken away from us and we are displaced, a major component of our Jewish identity and of our humanity is missing. So that gives us some context to understand why community life is so important. And that raises the question of what good can you find in being displaced, and how can that be a virtue? The Rebbe believed that in every situation that we find ourselves, we should seek out the positive. And while the state of being uprooted from our community and social network is obviously not a positive thing, but there is a positive side, and we should find that positive side, and we should live with it and maximize it. So let's talk about community again. Community and society, they provide us support, they provide us fellowship and unity and companionship, but they also provide a certain amount of expectation, of demands, of social norms. Now, these expectations can sometimes help us. They can sometimes bring us to a better place. Sometimes the fact that society expects me to act in a certain way can actually help enhance and bring out my virtues. But other times, social pressures, peer pressures, societal expectations can actually limit me, can limit each of us, can hold us back from being who we could really be. Because we just lean towards blending with society, and it's much more comfortable to be accepted for the very same reason that we need it and it nurtures us. It also kind of forces us into agreeing with whatever society says. And it can limit our own creativity, our own passions, our own values, our own beliefs. We can be almost tied to society. And being displaced can force us in a good way to challenge those prior expectations. I'll tell you a story, a very interesting story that's told of a Jewish man living in Russia who grew up in quite an observant home, and he would dress. He'd always wear his kippah wherever he went, and he wore it regardless of whether he was in synagogue or whether he was out on business or out for a walk. Much like I do myself, it's always on my head. And this person had the same personal value, that he wore his kippah everywhere. And the kippah is a reminder of God's presence, and that was part and parcel of his dress code at any time. Now, as this person became more successful in business and he started traveling to the big cities in Russia, to St. Petersburg, to Moscow, and was meeting a lot of people, it became a little bit of a social burden. Each time he met someone, he had to explain to them why he had this odd-looking piece of cloth on his head, which wasn't at all by any means as familiar as it is now. And at the beginning, he would explain, and he would continue to be proud of his identity and wore his kippah. But with time, it became very difficult for him. So what he started doing was, when he was out on business, he would put it away. And then when he would come back and visit his teachers and his mentor, he would put it back on. After several years, he was feeling like a hypocrite. When he's out on business, he's one person. When he's back in his village, he's a second person. So he decided, you know what? I'm going to come up. I'm going to be honest. I'm coming clean. I'm going to go to my teacher, my mentor, and I'm going to come without the kippah, as I always do in Moscow and in Petersburg. So he walks into his teacher, and his teacher tells him, I don't know the guy's name, but let's call him David for conversation's sake. So he says, David, you think I didn't know that when you were in Moscow and Petersburg, you weren't wearing a kippah? Of course I knew. But I thought that you were lying. When you're in Moscow and Petersburg, you're lying. You're not telling them who you really are. But now when you come here without the kippah, I see that you weren't lying to them, you were lying to us. In other words, having two sets of values is obviously not ideal, but the question is, which one's the real one? Who's the real you? Are you the real you when you're back home in your village, or are you the real you when you're out there? And of course, what this person should have done, he should have recognized the fact that even if he has this inner split in his own practical observance of something which he held to be important, and of course we can all find parallels in our own lives for values that we have and we can consider important, that can be difficult in certain social settings. But what he should have recognized is that whatever that value is, it's a value that I hold dear to me. Ideally, I should be strong enough to maintain that in the face of social and peer pressure. If I can't, at least I should recognize the fact that the truth is as I am deep inside. So back to our subject, social settings can create pressures and can create a challenge to our identity, to our creativity, to our, to the things that we hold dear. We could really feel a certain way about a certain moral value, ethics, but have a hard time saying that when society is saying otherwise. So again, social standards and community can cause us to flourish. It can help us, but it can also suppress our inner growth. And we may feel pressure to choose a career that is socially pleasing, etc. So we have this duality of, on the one hand, we have to maximize community. We have to use out community. We have to live in a community. And like we said over here, how the community turns us from being just a letter to being part of a story, part of a paragraph. At the same time, if we allow others to define us, then we can lose our identity as that letter. Let's go back to that analogy. Each person is a letter. Now, each person is a different letter. We're not all one letter. We're not all the same letter. We're not just one big mush of a bunch of identical letters. Each person is their own individual letter. And that individual letter contributes to the words, sentences, paragraphs, and stories. If I lose my identity as my letter, if we just become one big mush of social pressure, then I can't make a word, sentence, paragraph, or story because we're all identical. It's vital for us to maintain our independent identity as our letter, as my letter, as each of your letters, to be able to be part of the story. Let's see another quote from Hillel. Again, from the same time period, from the early, right just before the Common Era. And he kind of brings out this duality in this short quote. He says, if I am not for myself, who is for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? So let's take this apart. If I'm not for myself, if I don't let me be the one who defines myself and my own identity, then who is for me? Who's going to do that for me? There's no other person that can tell me what I can offer, what I have inside, what my true identity is. There's no other person that can limit and define us. The only place that can come from is from within, from inside of each of us. We each have to discover our true strengths, our true purpose in life, our unique ability to contribute. Like I said, our own letter. What is my letter? At the same time, if I'm only for myself, what am I? If I don't have the companionship, the guidance, the assistance, the partnership of our relationships with our friends, with our community, with our society, then we're going to be limited to being just one letter, and we'll never become part of that story, of that paragraph. So yes, our own letter only finds context in the words, sentences, and stories that it's a part of. Without that, we don't have, our own letter has no context. At the same time, if in order for our letter to contribute to the story, it has to be very self-aware of its own identity. So again, we have this duality of, on the one hand, the individual being, it's imperative for the individual to recognize our own strengths, our own ability to contribute in a very unique way, and not to let that be defined by external pressures, by society. At the same time, we're social creatures, and we're able to contribute to something so much greater and bigger than ourselves by being part of this story. So at the time that the Rebbe wrote that letter, he was no longer displaced. He was in New York. He already had leading positions in the Chabad movement, which was already starting to spread, not just in the country, but internationally. And just a few years later, he would accept the mantle of leadership of the entire Chabad movement. And he took it from being what it was in 1950 to being a very large global impact on Jewish life. There's now, many thousands of Chabad centers in over, almost probably 100 countries or more. So he led that, he took that, and he was by no means displaced, but he was reminiscing on the time when he was lost in South France, wandering and trying not to be caught by the Nazis, together with this other man and some other people, other fellow Jewish refugees. And the reminiscing of that time was not exclusively negative. As a matter of fact, he didn't even mention anything negative. All he focused on was the fact that being displaced enabled me to be true to myself, undistorted by society's pressures. And this is a very crucial point because it's so relevant now. Now we're all living in a time when the social norms are no longer normal. And we're spending much more time on our own, a lot less availability for social interactions. We get together on Zoom and study together, but it's not the same as sitting together at a Friday night dinner or studying in person. We don't have the same schmoozing and the same interactions. We're spending much more time on our own. So we could only focus on the negative part of it, that a person is a social creature. It's imperative for our well-being to be socially interactive. And of course, that's true. But we also could, and the Rebbe is encouraging this person in this letter to focus on the positive abilities and unique opportunity that these circumstances provide. And the unique opportunity is the ability to have a moment of clarity, to touch base with who and what we are in essence outside of social standards. And then when things do get back to normal, we should remember and hold on to that clarity that we had during this time of, let's call it, introspection. The Rebbe continues in the letter that fortunate is the person who does not allow these traits to disappear when they subsequently settle down and find tranquility. So is social distancing natural for us? It's not natural for us. It's actually quite antithetical to our nature as social creatures. No man is an island, and we're part of one greater continent, one bigger picture. We're all letters in one story. We're all just pieces of a broader puzzle. We're all just individual parts of a collective body. But in order for us to fulfill our function as a letter in a story, as a piece in a puzzle, as a part of the body in a greater body, the only way we can do that is if it's very clear to us who we are. Because if I'm not sure if I'm a B or an L or a W, I can't find a place in the story. If I'm not sure if I'm an eye, an ear, or a nose, I have no place in the human body. And if I'm not sure what colors I am, then I can't find my place in the puzzle. So while ultimately our place is in community, and that's why we're working so hard to build the Jewish community in Key Biscayne, because a bunch of individuals don't equal a community. We have to do that together. But at the same time, this unique opportunity of social distancing or limited social interactions enables us, and we have to use it out for that, because Netflix is not the only way to spend our time alone. We have to be thinking about what our strengths are, what our function is, what we are able to contribute to society. And we can ask ourselves some tough questions. How much have I been using my abilities in the last decades that I've been here? They say Shakespeare wrote his best plays while he was quarantined from one of the epidemics going on in his time. Like we spoke about some of you were at the history class of the pandemics in Jewish history. The Ramah wrote a full book explaining, analyzing, and interpreting the Megillah story, the story of Esther in the times of Purim. He wrote that in honor of the holiday of Purim when he was quarantined outside his city in Krakow during a pandemic. So it's a useful time for us to be thinking about, rethinking and reanalyzing what our own identity is and how we can best contribute. And it can be a liberating moment. A lot of the noise in our lives is quieter. The noise comes from peer pressure, from office politics, from the things that are going on just in day-to-day life. So a lot of them have been, the noise level has been lowered. So it's an opportunity to encounter the true I. What do we really want to achieve in life? Are we using our God-given abilities and talents in their greatest way? We don't know when things will go back to normal, but they will eventually, and we'll revert to our natural position as humans of being socially interactive, and we'll be getting together again in the same way as before. We'll be being ourselves together. And the goal is that when we do that, when we are able to get back together and put our story back together, each of our individual letters will be shining brighter, will be identified more clearly, will be bringing forth their own individual beauty in a stronger way, and that brings together to the communal picture in a much greater way. So that's the work we have cut out for us over the next however long. And that's the first letter that we'll look at in this course. And next week we'll be back with another letter of how the Rebbe is looking back and remembering the time of being displaced and wandering around in South France as a unique opportunity to really be me with no social pressures, with no outside defining factors that tell us what is normal. And that's something that we can very clearly learn from and apply it to our own lives. So we finished a little earlier. I'm happy to take questions if anyone wants, or comments, or really if anyone has a thought that you'd like to share of how you see yourself in this situation of social. I won't call it distancing, but I'll call it limited social interactions. How do you see yourself? How do you see this affecting your life? Mark, I see your camera's on. Can I put you and Kathy on the spot? There. You have to unmute yourself.
Unmute.
Yeah.
We're unmuted, yes. I think about it a lot, that right now I'm searching for something to come outside of me, and it isn't coming out so clearly right now. I'm still running my company from the house, but trying to keep my physical shape and my health while searching for some greater meaning. I'm thankful that the health is still there. I haven't caught the virus, and no one in my family has. How about you, Kathy?
It is a big search, Rabbi. I'm still searching.
I think it is. I think it's a lifelong mission. I don't think that there's if somebody, what do they say? They say always respect people looking for truth. Be very careful of those that found it.
Yeah, that's true. That's so true in today's world.
When you have the truth in your back pocket and you're going to tell everyone what you know is true, then it possibly might be coming from a place of arrogance more than a place of humility.
That is so true.
But constantly searching for truth and constantly being in a position of realizing that, listen, these challenges are also opportunities to look inside, to look deep inside. And we're all, we're all pieces of a puzzle. We're all letters in this story, and let's polish our own letters and let them shine forth.
That's so true.
Yes, thank
Very
you
prolific.
for your thoughts. Anybody else want to share a thought? I don't see other cameras on, but I see other people here. Anyone else want to reveal yourself? All right. I won't put anyone else on the spot if I don't see you. I can't do that.
It's a quiet day.
I'll be nice. But thank
how
you.
How about a thought to help us search, a direction for searching for the week?
That's a good question. On a general level, on a bigger picture level. So the question is often, if I'm allowed to quote John F. Kennedy, ask not what can be done for you, but ask what you can do. Meaning very often we naturally are inclined to look at society as something that's serving us. Now, we would never say those words because that sounds really self-centered, but we are naturally just inclined to look at the things that are in our life from the context of how they are part of my life. It's unnatural, and it takes humility to flip the camera, flip the view, and instead say, what role do I play in things outside of me? So let's start with relationships. We're just two people in a relationship. Very often we look at the other person as what they're doing to me and how they're making me feel. And it takes, and whoever's married knows what we have to do to switch the camera and think instead in the terms of how it is what I'm saying and what I'm doing felt and experienced by the other person. That's how it is in a relationship. Now, to take that to a bigger picture, to a community or to a nation. So instead of how society and my community is affecting my life, the question can be, what role do I play in outside of me, in the society, in my company, and with other people? How can I contribute to other people's lives? And it's a totally groundbreaking shift in perspective, because it opens up the door for a whole new a whole new series of personal growths and steps that we can take once we start looking at ourselves as part of a solution for something outside of us instead of just what we're experiencing. It's an unnatural shift, to be honest. Naturally we're always gravity pulls us down. We're always gonna be just passive and reactive and just on the receiving end of life instead of on the giving end. But who said that the natural is right? Maybe the way it should be is through hard work.
That's good, Rabbi. Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for joining. This video will be available online afterwards. And again, same time next week, 1:30 on Tuesday, we'll be examining another letter of the Rebbe and pulling out some life lessons that we can try to make relevant to 2020. What an interesting year. All right. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you.